Welcome to the Job Shop Show, where we talk with the owners, suppliers, partners, and customers of custom manufacturers. Listen and learn the secrets of top-performing job shops, the tools, techniques, and backgrounds that have made them successful, all in the quest of raising the bar for custom manufacturing. I'm your host, Jay Jacobs. This episode is sponsored by Paperless Parts, connecting buyers and suppliers of custom manufactured parts. The Paperless platform is a secure, ITAR-compliant, cloud-based manufacturing system for suppliers that reduces the amount of time spent on sales, estimating, quoting, administration, and order processing. It offers seamless integration with the accounting and ERP software tools that shops already use, such as QuickBooks, E2, and JobBoss. Paperless Parts was founded with a mission to make manufacturing more accessible by streamlining the quote-to-cash process. Spend less time quoting and more time selling. Shazam! This is Jay Jacobs. Welcome once again to the Job Shop Show. If you're thinking about buying a shop or are in the middle of it yourself, this episode is for you. It's also for you if you're thinking of selling. Our guest is currently in the middle of trying to buy a shop of his own. He'll remain anonymous because he's currently employed while he's looking, and we don't want to jeopardize his job. What I didn't expect in this conversation was that he started out looking for a small shop within his own financial savings and constraints. As the search has matured, he's expanded the hunt to larger shops. Our mystery man explains how he will now be able to finance a larger purchase as he does have limited funds. He also discusses what makes a shop attractive to him and things that are problems which make him walk immediately. His story is wonderful in another regard, as he came to the U.S. 15 years ago as an immigrant pursuing the American dream. And yes, that is what he calls it. He shares how he clawed his way through college, met his wife, and finally got his green card. He is so appreciative of the opportunity he's been given, and it was such an honor to hear his story and now share it with you. Let's begin. Welcome to the Job Shop Show.
Hi, Jay. Thank you for having me here.
You had reached out to me on LinkedIn. You are in the process of trying to buy a manufacturing company, and you had some questions for me, and we spoke, and I thought your story was really compelling and something that would have a lot of value for the listeners of the show. I wanted to have this conversation and get it recorded so that others who may be in the process of buying a company or maybe thinking about buying a company, maybe some of the things that you've learned will help them and help them narrow in and either be able to actually buy a company, because that's not a foregone conclusion that's going to happen, or structured in a way that ultimately works to their benefit, and hopefully the seller as well, because if you structure it right, it really is a win-win for both parties. You had reached out to me again on LinkedIn. Why me? How did you find me?
So I've been following your podcast for some time just because I'm a mechanical engineer by background. I like machine shops. I like anything mechanical, machines, stuff like that. So I've been following your podcast. And when I started this journey of acquiring a company, there's a lot of machine shops that come across my desk, a lot of fabrication shops. And I thought you were one of the experts that I knew about. And I had a few questions about a good shop. And so I reached out to you. And I have a question about that for you. Since I started looking at this, the big thing is we come across a lot of machine shops, a lot of fabrication shops, varying in size. Some between, most of them are between 5 to 10 people. And then there's some that are over 10 to 25 people. And then very few that I see that are over 25 people. My question to you was what is it that, let me step back. A lot of people in this space think machine shops, fabrication shops, because of the quantity of these shops, it's a very commoditized business, very hard to make any money in. And the constant advice is stay away from commoditized stuff.
Hmm.
But there is a big chunk of companies that actually make money in machining and fabrication. So, what is it that differentiates a medium shop from a good shop? I've got some ideas in my head, but I wanted to reach out and ask you, if you were looking at two shops, what would you consider? Yeah, it's okay. And what is good?
It's a really good question. And I would say that without having any evidence to back up my answer, a good shop is one that says no, meaning that they know what they're good at and what they're not good at. And they say no to the stuff that they're not good at so they can be the best they can be for the customers who are in their sweet spot. And
Mhm.
let's say a more average shop is not that disciplined and they take whatever comes in the door.
Now, can I add a little nuance to this when you look
Sure.
at a business, right? When I approach a broker, all I get is revenue, EBITDA, couple of, how much is repeat business, how big the shop is, maybe number of machines, right? It's very basic information. From that, I have to move ahead in the process, I have to kind of gauge in my head and kind of put the shop in somewhere between okay and good. When it's
Hmm.
bad, kind of, in my head, anything below, and tell me if this is correct, 15% EBITDA and up, great, good shop. 10 to
Hmm.
15, okay shop. Below 10, something's wrong.
I would say that those are pretty good ranges. I have not looked at the sheets that brokers are providing.
Hmm.
And with the size shops that you talked about before, it really depends if they are adding back in the owner's salary
Sure.
because that distorts a lot of it. And a shop may show a lower EBITDA, however, the owner is taking out um,
Hmm.
the money, and at the same time, they may present it to you, and there's really no money. The EBITDA has no money for the owner slash president slash manager at the top. So you pay yourself a reasonable salary, and
Sure.
boom, the EBITDA shot. Probably a really good indicator is if you sign the NDA and you find out who the shop is, you look at their website, the EBITDA, and their website looks like it was done up ago or so, then they are probably making money despite themselves and they've got something going on that you might want to dig deeper into.
Hmm. Does certifications, because when I look at a machine shop, buying a machine or leasing a machine, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can do that, right?
Yeah.
But in my head, if they are ISO certified, they're better than a normal non-ISO certified machine. If they have AS certification, that's even better. If they have the people to run, say, a 5 axis machine, if they have the talent, that's separating.
Hmm.
If they do value added services, so it's not just machining a block, it is machining, plating, assembling, and shipping. If they do all of that, that would differentiate them.
I think the value add piece would get me excited. It's not normally what shops do. However, that makes you a stickier supplier for a
Sure.
shop. And then it's also a skill set that you can build upon. Certifications, uh, if you're AS certified, then then you're really in the game. ISO, I don't know. It can be you can be following it. You can just have a piece of paper, and I look at some companies who are ISO certified, and they can tell you why they make bad parts all the time, right?
Yes.
Doesn't mean they're making good parts, they're actually following it.
Yeah.
So
It's at least better than a shop that does not have it, right? I would think so.
it's a differentiator, and it at least shows that they've made investments at some point in time. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
We jumped into some great questions, and I want to step back and get some of your story so we have some context of why you're looking to become an owner and take a jump from the corporate world. How did you get to the point where you are now saying, I think I want to own a shop, and specifically in the manufacturing world? What's your story?
So, a mechanical engineer by education, but I've been working for a Fortune 500 industrial company for more than a decade. So, my background is very industrial, very mechanical. And then I did my MBA, and that's where I was exposed to something called search funds, which
Let's
basically, yeah.
Yeah, let's bookmark the search funds because
Okay.
that's a really interesting topic. I'd like to hear though, even
Mhm.
go back. You were not born in the US. So how
Right.
did you get to the US, and why I'm really curious, why did you uproot yourself from another country,
Mhm.
come here and make this your home?
So the whole idea was, opportunity, the American dream, right? Everyone across the world has heard about the American dream and how much opportunity the American economy has, like $25 trillion economy, largest in the world. Uh, if you can work your ass off and get to the US, you can make it, right? So for me, education was one of the routes to get to the US legally. So came here for my master's,
What
did
did you
that.
have to do in India from the education standpoint, because it's really competitive, as I understand it, to get into engineering school. So you had to really do something to differentiate yourself to get your bachelor's degree.
Candidly, actually, there's a lot of engineering colleges in India. There's
Okay.
a billion people. To cater to those billion people, there's a lot of engineering colleges. Of course, there are tiers, right? The top
Hmm.
tier is extremely hard to get into. Honestly, I am not in from the top tier. I'm not that great an engineer, which I realized before I came to the US. I worked in India after getting my bachelor's degree. I realized that I worked as an engineer in design for automotive companies, and I realized that engineering is one little cog in this big massive company, and it drove me to look at the other things that make a company
Hmm.
sustain and grow. So when I applied for my master's, I realized I wanted to go beyond technical stuff.
Hmm.
And so I applied for a program that's called engineering management, which is like a
Hmm.
hybrid between engineering and management. My parents are, I mean, they're decently well off. They were decently, and they still are decently well off. So I had the resources to get me to the US
Hmm.
and pay for one semester, three courses. And
Hmm.
when I got here, um, I put all my money down, paid for it. I had about $200 left. I didn't get any funding to begin with. So I went to a school which was known for giving funding to international students
Hmm.
and kept my fingers crossed that hopefully by the end of the semester, I'll get something. Struggled through there. I remember lived on $400 a month, food,
Wow.
living, everything.
How did you do that?
It was sharing a bedroom with another person, finding really cheap housing, not the
Hmm.
best,
Hmm.
no cell phone, no car,
Hmm.
uh, cut down on expenses as much as you can, right? No
Yeah.
eating out. My my indulgence was a Thursday evening. special for students, $1.50 at Hardee's for a Coke and burger. That's the
Mm.
only indulgence I had, and that too only after I got a job at the library that could pay for it. I just couldn't
Wow.
get myself to spend my parents' money on indulgences, so I struggled through that. At the end of the semester, I got funding, so I made it through that, got some funding, studied, tried to accelerate the course so that I can get a job quickly. Finished my master's in a year and a half, and then got a job offer from the company that I work for, and have been there since. Yeah. So
Wow.
started in quality and moved functions. And that's what then I did an MBA to move more into the commercial side of the company to understand the customer facing aspect of a
Hmm.
company, right? Yeah, so to do that, I did my MBA and then was able to move over to the commercial side.
During your journey here, and first of all, I am blown away. The desire and the willingness that you demonstrated. I mean, you didn't have a choice. If you wanted to succeed here,
Mhm.
you did what you had to do.
Yep.
And that I I appreciate you making that effort because that's you are living the American dream.
Mhm.
Even if you don't buy a company, you have created an opportunity for yourself. And along that journey, you have gotten married and you have two young children now.
Yep.
Question I have is you have a stable job. Think it
Mhm.
pays pretty decent.
Mhm.
Do you see that it is risky at this point in your life now that you have a young family to go out and be an entrepreneur and leave the mothership?
There's definitely a risk. The way I think about it is yes, if I do take this entrepreneurial path, there is a risk. I might, depending on the path I take, I might have a personal guarantee on a massive loan, couple of millions in loan. But I also look at the other side saying, sure, I have a risk here, but if I continue here, one is the risk of regret of not doing it. Jeff Bezos has this really great saying where he says, I have this regret framework. If there is something that in my deathbed or something like that, he says, if in my deathbed I regret not having done that, then I will go do it now. Right. I think of it in this way that if I don't do this now, first of all, it's going to get harder. I have kids. It's not never going to be easier, right?
That's right.
Now is the easiest point. And will I regret it if I don't do it? I
Mm.
definitely will if I don't try. Yeah. And
Uh,
then I'm in an industry that's very cyclic. Every 3 years, there's a downturn. There's layoffs all across the industry. Thankfully, I've made it through a bunch of them, but I might lose my job in the next one. I don't know.
mm.
There
Right.
is the risk either side. I have a
Yes.
supportive spouse. My kids are young. So the worst case scenario is I won't make it, but I still have runway. I've made it to this point. I don't see myself not being able to make it back to this point if I fail. So worst case is not terrible.
Well, you have a kindred spirit in me,
Yeah.
and I don't know how much of the Rapid story you know. I
Mhm.
started the company in 2001. Actually, I bought a very small fabricator 3 days after September 11th, and I had essentially put in my family's life savings, and I had an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 1 month old when I started the company. And I felt the same way. I had the opportunity to step away because of the uncertainty at 9/11, and I thought about it obviously really hard and decided that I would rather try and fail than not try at all, and because that would just eat me up. And
Yes. Honestly,
that
yes, definitely.
said, I'm going to give it my best shot. And if it doesn't work, and I've come to the realization you're not failing if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
As long as you learn things and you can leverage that to whatever you do next in your life.
Mm-hmm.
You have that dream. And how did you start your process? You have the engineering background, so you probably created a framework of the criteria that you were looking for. Can you tell me about what that looked like initially? Because I know that it's changed over time, but let's go back to the beginning where
Mm-hmm.
you thought it would go.
So when I looked at criteria, a couple of things that form the criteria, high criteria is one is what is the industry? For me, industry was going to be industrial manufacturing, distribution, or service.
Hmm.
Manufacturing is my first choice, right? Just given my background. Distribution is my secondary one, just because I know within the company that I work for, I've been exposed to the distribution side of the business as well. Service also, just because I was part of manufacturing, I've dealt a lot with companies that deal with servicing, say, a factory, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so starting with that funnel, which a lot of time when you talk to other people who are looking at companies, this is actually quite narrow a filter already. Second level was location. I don't want to move my family. Buying a company is going to be so consuming anyway. My spouse has a very good network where we are, and I don't want to put them through more than they really need to. So the location became very tight. So
Hmm.
industry, location. Then it comes down to size. My initial thought was I want to own 100% equity. That means I want 100% ownership of the company.
Hmm.
That then restricts me to how much money I can bring in as my contribution. So say you start then looking at how do you finance this? These smaller companies, you need SBA 7A loans to help finance.
Hmm.
So if I bring in, say, $300,000, the SBA 7A loan allows me to bring 10%. It allows me 5%, but there are a lot of conditions tied to that. So I'll keep it easy for now. 10% is the minimum SBA 7A requires the owner to put in. So if I bring 300,000, that means I can look at a transaction value of $3 million.
Hmm. Okay.
So that's where I started, right? And when I kept those three criteria, the industry, location, size of the transaction, I was exposed to a lot of smaller places that had employees of maximum maybe 10 people, right?
Right. Yeah.
Where the owner and the wife are two key employees. They're both trying to retire. And
Yeah.
then and mostly these were kind of machine shops, fabrication places. And then so there's a team leader or a shop floor manager who's been the husband and wife friend for the past 40 years. And
Hmm.
he's in his 60s, mid 60s, and could retire with the two of them, right? With the
Hmm.
husband and wife. And that became a very fragile situation where, yeah, if I buy it, there's a big threat of those three key people. So two were going to leave anyway, but then the third team leader also might leave,
Hmm.
which leaves me to just concentrate on actually probably running a machine, right? That's not where my competency lies. Even though I'm an engineer, I can spend time and figure out how to run a machine, right? Probably
Hmm.
be terrible at it, but I could figure it. But it would be a waste of time and not something that I wanted to do.
Hmm.
So I had to then modify my criteria to say I can't change location. The industry, that's what wakes me up. That's what
Hmm.
it's, I can't see myself go run. something other than an industrial manufacturing or a distribution place. It wouldn't
Hmm.
excite me. And it better excite you to wake you up and go work like hell, right? It's a lot of work. So I don't want to change that criteria. So the third criteria of owning 100%
Hmm.
was one criteria that I had to flex, right? That, I need to look at transactions where I might not own 100% just to
Yep.
start looking at more
Right.
opportunity.
That would allow you to buy a bigger shop with more people, so you had the redundancies in the
Correct.
shop. And I also, couple points. We're recording in September of 23. When did you start the process?
January 23 is, I would say, is when I actually,
So you're
contacted the bank and
yeah,
lawyer.
yeah, 8, 9 months in. Okay, so that gives us some context that you've been doing it for a while, but not a terribly long time.
Mhm.
So you have expanded to looking for larger shops, and you also are open not only to machine shops, as I understand, or fabricators, but to maybe manufacturers who have their own product. So you're
Correct.
not strictly limited to services, or if there was a combination, if they did
Mhm.
outside machining for other folks and had some product of their own, that would be a good situation for you as well.
Yeah, what I found is when you start going higher in revenue opportunities, you do see the machine shops and fabrication places, but you also get to see this world of other stuff, right? Assembly, where there's a
Mm,
product, they're assembling the product. They're not necessarily manufacturing everything in-house, but they're assembling it and putting it together. Or bigger service shops, like things like servicing and distribution of a hoist systems,
mm,
conveyor systems, electrical, all the electricals in the factory. You need
mm.
someone to maintain that. When it goes down, you pick up the phone and call a service guy, right? You
Yes.
start seeing these other things. Otherwise, in the smaller range, I was only seeing machine shops and fabrication shops.
Right. So as you expanded that, how did you're okay with not being 100% owner? What does that mean? Where is the other money going? Sounds like that you would have partners or equity investors.
Mhm.
How are you thinking about that?
This may be a good place where we could talk about the search fund
Let's
model.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So just some background on what search funds are, right? Search funds are, it's a financing kind of vehicle where it started in the big business schools. Started off, I think, in Harvard, first of all. And then till maybe 5 years back, it remained in the top tier of business schools as something that
Hmm.
their students pursued. What happens, and I'll try to be very simplistic. There's a lot of literature that you can read up about this, but I'll keep it quite simple. It's typically an MBA who's finished their MBA and wants to go into entrepreneurship, doesn't have someone like me who doesn't have a bright startup idea, as
Hmm.
in I'm not a 0 to 1 person, but I can do a 1 to 2,
Hmm.
1 to 3, 1 to 4 kind of thing, right? I can take something that exists and grow it. So if
Hmm.
there's someone like that who wants to get into entrepreneurship, search funds um, are a good vehicle. There's a lot more variation, but two big variations of search funds. One is a traditional search fund, which is me as a student can go to my network, and there's a very good network of people existent already, to ask them for money to run a search. So it can be 200 to $500,000 that I can raise to go out and look for a company for 2 years. That's the typical timeline.
Hmm.
So the investors will give you 200 to 500,000 depending on a bunch of variables, right? For you to survive, as in
Hmm.
live, eat, pay rent, and to go look for a company in 2 years. When you find the company, You go back to those investors and say, hey, I found this company. I'm going to need a couple of $1 million from you guys.
Mhm.
You guys will get your initial investment in me for those 2 years gets rolled in as equity, and you get kind of a step up. So say the investors gave $500,000, right?
Mhm.
Their equity of 500,000 gets rolled into the company that I've brought to them,
Mhm.
right? And they'll get a step up of say maybe 1.5 to 2. So say the step up is 2, then their equity will be worth $1 million, right? They will get
Okay.
$1 million
Right.
worth of equity. And so in that, I'll bring them the deal. If they like the deal, they'll fund the deal. Typically 50% equity, 50% debt. It can vary. I'm giving a very,
Where
very
does the debt come from? Do they have a network of people who are willing to provide the debt
yeah,
or?
there's conventional lenders. There's a very big network of these
Mhm.
banks. Not only banks, I'd say non-banking financial companies also that like to invest in small businesses. So there's a big network. So it's conventional debt, usually not personally guaranteed, right? Because as you go up the deal size, you can find companies that are financing that don't require personal guarantees. So 50% debt, 50% equity, and then the company is overall owned by the investors. And over time, the searcher, me as the searcher who found the company, will grow equity for up to 25%. So starting at the deal signing, so the moment the purchase agreement is signed, I get 5%.
Okay.
Sorry, not 5%, 8.3%, right?
3.3.
Then
Okay.
another 8.3% is, I think, after 1 year, right? And then another 8.3% is given at, when you meet certain IRR hurdles, and I think when the sale of the company happens. So that's the traditional search fund model. So in that,
And
ownership is restricted to 25% for me,
okay.
75% for the investors. The second predominant search fund model is a self-funded search, something like I am doing, but mine's a little different take. So in self-funded, the person has their own, typically a little more senior in their career. They have some amount of savings, and so they fund that 2 year search process themselves with their own funds, right? So
Mm-hmm.
something I'm doing, but there's a bunch of people that do this full time. I'm doing it with a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, People that do this just full time, funded through their savings.
Mm-hmm.
When they find a company, they can go to these investors, right? But typically, these self-funded companies are smaller than the traditional search fund. So they could be up to like 1 million to 2 million in EBITDA. 2 million is pushing it, but it could vary like from 300 to 1.5 million, 2 million in EBITDA, right? Typically smaller, something that could be financed by SBA 7A loan. So it would have a personal guarantee. So, and SBA would finance the big chunk of it. And then for the rest of it, you go to the equity investors, right? So say a typical thing would be 70% debt, 15% actually owner carry. So the owner might
Mm-hmm.
finance about 15% of it, and then
Yep.
15% from investors. That's the cap table, but the ownership in this case can be significantly owned by me, the searcher,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm taking bulk of the risk. I have taken the 2 year risk of financing all of this. I will
Meaning the personal
search.
guarantee is signed by you.
Oh, no, no, no. The searching the deal. I
Oh,
bring the deal, right?
beforehand. Yeah.
Yep. I
Yep.
financed all of that. I financed the due diligence. I would finance anything up to buying the company, up to the investor signing the check. I would have
Mm-hmm.
financed most of it. and then the personal guarantee, right? This is a couple of $1 million loan, completely
Mhm.
signed by me. None of the investors need to sign it because
Mhm.
they own less than 20% of the business. If there is an investor that owns more than 20%, SBA requires them to sign a personal guarantee. So
Mhm.
that kind of puts a cap on what the investor can actually own. And hence the searcher ends up owning a big chunk because of the risk that the searcher is taking.
When you say big chunk, what does that mean as a percentage
Um,
that you would own?
anything from up to, I'd say, 80%. There's been deals that have gone over 80% as well for ownership, but I would say 80% is like an average. Yeah.
And what sort of controls are put into the operating agreement that protects the investors, since you or the party that's bringing the deal to the table has so much equity
Yeah.
in the deal?
Yeah, that becomes very critical, the agreement between the investors and, say, me as the owner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Couple of things from my point of view, right? What I'm looking for, say I go down this route of I am doing a self-funded search, but say I go down the route of buying a smaller company that can be financed by an SBA loan, and I own 80%, right? What
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for is long-term investors, right? That are more buy and hold. That's my personality, buy and hold rather than buy and flip and sell. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
that kind of a person. So what I would look for in an investor is, are you willing to hold, or do you want to sell it? If you want to sell it, you're probably not something that, our ideals don't match, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then decision making is something that I want. So when I say decision making, there's multiple things. The things that worry the investors the most is dilution of equity.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they don't want to lose their percentage of ownership. They don't want it to get diluted, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they give in saying, any new equity that I bring in needs to be approved by you. But you can also say that, say you go into a company that has employees that are not getting compensated well. You could say, hey, I need 5% equity that I can distribute to employees to just show ownership, right? So that essentially the operating agreement is quite flexible, but you have to be very careful that you don't spook the investors, right? They don't typically like to see owners pay, not, or the owner, me, paying myself a big salary without them seeing a return. So then there's a point over there that, my salary is going to be X number of dollars, increased at, say, 5% per year, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least those two are big. And then reporting requirements, right? How often are you going to present details on how the company is doing, financials? How often are you going to have board meetings? Those kind of things, that cadence of reporting is
Mm-hmm.
also very critical to investors.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole bunch of things that the investors can find important, but it's something that you negotiate with them. You propose something and then you negotiate, right?
It sounds like you're moving up the revenue. You're looking at larger companies. How did you develop your network of investors so that you have the financial ability to do so?
One is, when I first started, right? Because of my criteria being so tight and
Mm-hmm.
me wanting to own 100%, I didn't look beyond what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
But when I said I need to get investors in, then you start searching, okay, how do I get these investors in? And that's when you start digging into the search fund network. There's an SMB
Mm-hmm.
network on Twitter. It's a great network for SMB owners or people who want to go buy SMBs, right?
What is SMB?
Oh, small and medium business, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a massive search fund network, first of all, and then there's an SMB network on Twitter that's very, very active,
Mm-hmm.
very, very helpful. So just talking to people within these two networks they tell me, or they when I first started looking, they said, you get a good deal, the money is there, right? There
Okay.
are people, that's the beauty of this country, right? $25 trillion economy, lots of wealthy people who are just waiting for an opportunity to invest in something that's going to give them a good return, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and the returns on this, the investors that invest in this asset class almost, right? It's an asset class,
Hmm.
get over 30% IRR, which is a awesome return.
Is that you said that you're looking for long-term investors who don't want to sell. So you say a 30% IRR, which IRR meaning internal rate of return.
Mhm.
So that if you held it for 5 years, it'd be compounding at 30% each of
Correct.
those 5 years. And as the
Correct.
value grows, it's growing significantly. You're young. You may want to own this company for 20 years. Is there a mechanism in there potentially for you to buy out the other shareholders over time? Or I'm thinking about it, if I invested money, I don't want to wait 20 years before I see a return. Is there a deferred return that goes
Mhm.
to the investors along the way? And when does it start? And if it starts essentially from the day of the deal, does it maybe get deferred, meaning it's counted, but it's not paid out
Mhm.
until you have criteria? Or maybe it's all of these. How does all this happen if I'm an investor and I don't want to wait 20 years?
Of course. So there's, like you said, it can work in many, many different ways, right? You can start from zero payments for 5 years, and then investors get all their money at the end at 5 years if you sell the company, right? And then it'll be, to get a 30% IRR at the end of 5 years, you better have an awesome deal,
Mm,
awesome sale to make up for all that lost time, right?
hmm.
From that being in one extreme, that no payments for 5 years, to what I typically model is a 10% preferred return
Hmm.
every year, right? Now that can be paid out quarterly or 6 months, but essentially for a year, your return will be 10%, right?
And I want to put some numbers on that. So
Sure.
if you had $1 million of EBITDA, which I'm sure you'd be thrilled with, it's not 20% or a 10% of a million. It's the investors own 20% of the company. So that the portion which they're getting a return on is the 10% of the 200,000. Is that so
It's a
20,000?
10% on the money that they invested.
Right. So on the money they invested.
Right. So say that I got $500,000 from investors, a
Yes.
10% return would be $50,000 for them.
So it doesn't, you need the EBITDA supported. I wasn't thinking clearly.
Mhm.
It doesn't, as long as the EBITDA supports it, and probably there's got to be obviously there's EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So there's got to be substantial EBITDA beyond that 50,000 because taxes got to be paid. There may be principal on the debt that has to
Yeah.
be paid. If you
So
if
what
you're a
typically
long-term
happens?
investor, yeah, I was gonna say, if you're a long-term investor, you want the company to be spending money on new equipment and expanding facilities and hiring new people, which means payroll before you get, the whole
Mhm.
cash flow thing. It's so I could see that not happening. Maybe the preferred is not paid for first year or the second year, and
Correct.
then only criteria. And then if the funds aren't there, it's accumulated,
Mhm.
and when the funds are there,
It
the
gets paid.
investor gets paid. Gotcha.
Yes. And then
Okay.
a lot of this is defined when you take an SBA loan, each bank has a different criteria, but there's a debt
Mm,
service coverage ratio,
yes.
which is basically the best way to look at it is we're talking EBITDA, but EBITDA is not a very good measure. It's not cash flow. It's not the money that gets left over. at the end of the day. So cash flow, which has already taken capital expenditure into consideration, that is, you have to buy machines to just keep your current capacity going.
Mm-hmm.
You have to reduce your EBITDA from that. You have to reduce your capital expenditure from that EBITDA to come to cash flow. That cash flow has to be a certain multiple of the amount of debt that you have to pay, right? Only then the bank will underwrite the deal, right? And every bank has a different multiple, and so that kind of puts a cap on how much the investors can get, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how much you can actually pay for the company also, right?
Sure.
That
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
controls the valuation.
Yeah. What other things are you thinking about in your search process now? If someone's listening, are there any nuggets that you can share that might save them some time or pain?
What I would definitely say, and this is something that the traditional search fund folks follow, and people who have a very tight criteria also follow, and investors in the space, right? They say, make sure you don't cast your net too wide, right? Get your criteria a little tight so it's a little manageable. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, mine is manufacturing, right? When I look at a deal, like we talked earlier about what is a good and a bad EBITDA, right? Good, a bad, and okay, and a good EBITDA, right?
Mm.
If you focus your search a little bit, you're able to put the time and effort into understanding an industry, understanding what's bad, okay, and good in an industry. And hence, you're able to very quickly value a company, at least within a certain range, right? And you're able to move fast. In this space, they say time kills deals, right? If you take too much time to respond to a broker who's sent you
Mm.
a sim,
Yep.
they've moved on. They probably got 10 offers and there's an LOI already signed. You've lost your opportunity, right? So focus, reduce, tighten your focus, understand an industry. Now, within that industry, if you don't find opportunities, then go ahead, okay, broaden your search or go to some other industry. But again, study it well so that you can make a very educated decision on how much you want to pay and what you can actually do to grow the business, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's what you want to do when you buy the business, right? So you
Yeah.
need to spend some time in understanding the business that you're going after.
Mm. Okay.
It'll be very well spent. The other thing I would also say is use this network. There are people in this network that buy and sell companies day in and day out, right? Whether it's investors is a more obvious thing. Okay, I might need
Mm-hmm.
money, so I need to go find investors. But the not so obvious is, and where people might think, might try to be a little stingy, is the quality of earnings report and getting a good M&A lawyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there's plenty of good people in this network, and they will all tell you, you might feel that the cost of a quality of earnings report, which could vary, from 10,000 to 30, 40,000, and a good lawyer that could also vary in that range, right? They are worth their money in gold, especially when you are signing a personal guarantee that's a couple of $1 million.
Mm.
Spending money up front on some of these things that check your downside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your downside risk, because you really don't know what the company is till you actually sign the purchasing agreement and own the
Mm-hmm.
company. There is
Yeah.
a lot of information dissymmetry. You don't know a lot, and you're
Mm.
taking a chance. So spend money upfront. And there are a lot of reasonable folks, professionals in this space. Spend the money upfront to make sure your downside is controlled.
Could you expand on what a quality of earnings report is?
Yeah, quality of earnings report basically is I'd break it probably into two chunks. There's probably many more chunks, but in my head, there's a commercial aspect of it, and then there is the financial aspect. The commercial aspect is this company is in industry XYZ. Let's just say machining, right?
Hmm.
How big is the machining industry? Is it growing? Who's the local
Mm,
competition? Why is this company winning in this region? And what are a couple of the levers that you could pull? That is
yeah.
their pricing terrible, or do they have this value added thing that they're not fully leveraging, or their website needs updating?
Hmm.
The commercial due diligence will give some idea of that. And this is something that you could also probably do, the commercial side of it, some of it at least that you could do, right?
Hmm.
Then the financial due diligence is the owner has given you a bunch of financial information, right? Whether it all actually is true, just very basically, is it correct or not? At the end of the day, the EBITDA or the cash flow that you have put on your Excel sheet, will that actually be there when you sign the purchase agreement? Or, there's
Is
something
it
happening in the background that's going to make it evaporate.
is it almost a mini audit?
It is.
So you go in there and you look at if they say they have bills, if they say they have revenue, you're spot checking and
I would
pulling
say,
stuff out of.
in fact, it's more than an audit. In my head, an audit is, this revenue line item. He said he's making
Hmm.
$2 million a year. I'm checking if he's making $2 million a year.
Hmm.
But it is more than that. It is the cash flow. So they look at tax returns, they look at
Mm.
bank, inflow and outflow out
Okay.
of the bank,
Yep. Yep.
um, and your income statement. So there's three or four things that the QFE person puts together to get a very, very strong idea of whether the number is correct.
Hmm.
Also, especially in manufacturing, working capital could be a big issue where
Hmm.
quality of earnings will really tell you if you have the
Yep.
right amount of working capital, right? Those are a couple of big things that the QFE can really help you with.
What do you think of inventory when a shop says that we also need you to buy $500,000 of finished goods that's sitting on the shelves? What do you think about that? How do you approach that conversation?
What I've learned is when a shop owner has made up their mind about a certain price and what's included in that, it
Hmm.
becomes very hard to move them from that certain price, right? Uh,
Mm.
but what are the components that go into that price, right? When you start digging into that, say that he says there's $500,000 worth of finished goods that's included in this price.
Hmm.
Awesome, great. So that will go kind of into the working capital calculation, right?
Hmm.
But the due diligence that you have to do is that what's on the shelf, first of all, is it sellable, right? Is there a PO
Absolutely.
attached to it, right? If there's a
Hmm.
PO, great, I'll take it, right?
Yes.
But say it's a very custom thing that you've made for a customer, and that customer is really pissed off with you and not buying anything from you again, you're stuck with that, right? That's where QFE really helps, right? And what all the people that have bought companies before have told me, as part of your QFE, you yourself need to go to the shelf, count what is there yourself against what was disclosed, so you know exactly why that thing has been sitting there for 3 months, right?
Hmm.
And whether it'll stay there, or if it's something that the customer is going to buy at some point, right? Yeah.
Have you gotten to the point where you have wanted to make an offer, given them a term sheet or letter of intent, or actually done so?
Mhm.
And maybe you could talk about an experience there. What I'm trying to do is get these nuts and bolts out that if someone hasn't made an offer, what that's like, what may be included, what you're thinking about, and where the negotiation points are.
So yeah, I've put in one LOI and two IOIs. So LOI is letter of intent,
Hmm.
and IOI is intent of, I can't remember the the full form of IOI, but it's one level below the LOI, right?
Hmm.
IOI is completely non-binding. LOI
Hmm.
has elements that are binding, that is
Hmm.
legally enforceable. And on the LOI side, critical items that need to be on the LOI, purchase price, of course, right?
Hmm.
Uh, Working capital in my deal was it was a big chunk.
Hmm.
So how much working capital am I expecting within that purchase price?
Hmm.
That was important to state. How much of the purchase price is coming from the owner, right? So
Hmm.
say it's $1 million, I'm expecting the owner to finance $250,000.
Hmm.
What does that entail for the owner? Is it a 5% interest, 10% interest, paid quarterly, 6 monthly, right? So that they
Hmm.
can see what kind of cash flow they will get, right? With manufacturing, real estate becomes something that gets into the mix, right? They
Yeah.
typically want to sell or rent. Now,
Hmm.
if they want to rent, they typically state what they want as rent. And then you say, yes, I'm going to take it for this rent, but I need a lease for at least 10 years because the SBA loan is a
Mm.
10 loan, and SBA will expect you to be in that place for the duration of the loan, right? Or if you're purchasing it, then what's the price you're going to offer, right? Those are the big things that I can think of. Then the a legally binding part of an LOI is it says, if you accept this offer, then I expect you to give me exclusivity for whatever, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. You
Mm.
can say.
Yeah.
The exclusivity basically means I get full access to their books, everything, right? Not
Hmm.
employees, or I can't speak to their employees or customers typically, but everything within their company I have access to do my due diligence for 30, 60, 90, whatever number of days. And in that time period, they will take the business off market. That is, they will not shop it around for that time, basically because I'm spending time, effort, money
Sure.
uh, to take the deal forward. And it would be a big loss for me if they shop it around. And
It'd be like making an offer on a house and they accept it, but they're still entertaining better offers.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
This has been really illuminating. I appreciate you being forthcoming and sharing all the ground of what you're doing here and your story. If we're sitting here 5 years from now having a follow-up conversation, what has to have happened for you to be thrilled uh, with the outcome of your process?
I would have definitely been a owner of a company
Hmm.
with a plan, not only plan, but having executed significant growth. I'm 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 doing this so that I can grow a company. So within 5 years, hopefully I've at least doubled the company, at least.
Mm.
And the other thing is to grow the company. Also, one of the reasons I'm doing this is to have the flexibility to grow it a lot. And also that means taking myself out of daily operation, right? Of running a business, right? Doing that is extremely hard. And I'm hoping by end of year 5, I've at least gotten out of maybe going, having to get to the shop floor and looking at hey, how much did we make yesterday? How many units did we make yesterday? Did we have any rejects? That minutia, I'm hoping to have graduated to more company level metrics. Hey, the last week, did we hit, what's the pipeline looking like? I'm hoping I would have worked myself up to that point.
I hope in 5 years we would be able to have this conversation, and you far exceeded what you just put out there. Anything else you want to ask me before we end this?
One question is I ask owners is, if this company's been with you for this long, right? What what drives you to sell, right? In my head, I'm a buy and hold person.
Mm-hmm.
If the company, my head, I want to bring it to a stage where it's making enough money that I can step back, hire someone to run it, and then I just oversee it. Well, what drives, like for you, Rapid, you put in so many hours, you grew it so well, right?
Mm-hmm.
What drove you to maybe sell? And it's a challenge, right? You must have spent more time at that company than with your wife and kids at some point, right?
Well, it was an unsolicited offer, and they paid 10 times EBITDA,
Oh,
which, as
yeah.
pretty rich. And that definitely played into it, because for the standard multiples, I would have had to definitely be within the company for another 2 to 3 years. And who knows what's going to happen in that sort of time frame. And then the pandemic happened, maybe like a little over 3 years, but it's that sort of thing. You never know when you're running a business what's going to happen. And there's definitely ups and downs in manufacturing. I think the other part was, though, I was ready to try something different. And I felt that the I try to be aware of my capabilities, and I like to follow in the words of my mentor, Dan Sullivan. And he says there's three types of people in the world: people who make it up, people who make it real, and people who make it recur. I'm definitely a make it up guy, and I can make it real. I hate to make it recur.
Yeah.
And Rapid had really gotten to the point where, to take it to the next level, it was making it recur, and that didn't interest me.
Understood.
The timing of their offer was good, and it allowed me to uh, get involved in other things, and I think even today it was the right decision.
Nice. Just one more question, something from
Hmm.
what you mentioned, right? At any point, does it happen where you get away from this worry of you never know what's going to happen, right?
Oh yeah, I slept like a baby, because I I was very financially conservative.
Hmm.
I was always We were always growing really fast, but I viewed it as asymmetric risk, and I was really managing the downside. So I always made sure we had a month's worth of sales in cash on hand. And then our receivables was about 35 days. So I had, essentially another month of cash coming in. And since our business turned around so quickly, we were making parts in 1 to 2 weeks. And, in 2 weeks, we pretty much would have run out of business. That gave me the comfort level that I had the ability to maneuver uh, within the cushion of cash that I had in that time frame.
Nice. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
cash is king. And I remember people saying we didn't have enough debt, and that made me laugh. We had debt. It was very, very manageable. I looked at it. We survived through the 2008, 2009 downturn, and that was pretty rough. I think our sales were down either 26 or 28%. So
wow.
I sort of modeled the worst case scenario, what would that look like? We were still profitable.
Sure.
It was hard, but we were still profitable. And that experience, as much as it sucked at the time, was a good way to model what I saw as a worst case scenario in the future and protect
You
myself
kept
and the company.
you kept 1 month of COGS and OPEX as cash?
No, 1 month of revenue.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Okay.
yeah.
Nice.
Just sitting there, and then if you're listening, at the end we were around 50 million in sales, so we had about 4 million in cash sitting there. Now it was managed prudently. It wasn't sitting in one account at our
Yes.
regional bank, but I had cash. Yeah,
Someday, hopefully, I'll get to that point.
I hope you do, because as I said, man, I slept really well at night.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on again. The search funds was something that's new to me, and I knew of them, but you have definitely given me a lot more information and context on what they are and how they can be used. And if I am looking at buying a business in the future, it's something that I'm going to explore. I might even reach out to you to get tapped into that network.
Mhm.
You're anonymous because you are fully employed now by this Fortune 500 company. We want to protect you until you make the jump. And I am looking forward to a repeat conversation with you in, well, 6 months, year, whatever it is. And you are now a shop owner. You've got an acquisition under your belt, and I would love to have a follow-on call and hear the details of how that was structured and how it's going, and things that went the way you thought, and things that didn't. Because as you said, until you actually buy the company and give them the money, you're really not going to know the company. So you do the best you can to protect yourself, but you definitely are crossing your fingers along the way.
Yeah.
Well, if you're listening and thinking about buying a company, thinking about leaving your job, hopefully we gave you some good nuggets, a framework of how to look at this. And I think that with the baby boomer retirement that's upon us, there are so many owners who are ready to leave their business, and in response to comment, why sell? They're selling because it's time. They want to enjoy their life, or unfortunately, in some cases, a health issue is forcing them to sell. And regardless of the reason, there are going to be so many companies that are transferring hands in the next 5 to 10 years. If you have an entrepreneurial bent, I think the best way to explore this is to start to explore it. Talking to brokers, looking at companies. It doesn't mean you have to buy. And what I say is a lot of learning is repetition. You have to get the reps in. And the more reps, the more you see the patterns, you see what's usual, what's not usual. And then all of a sudden this great deal comes along. You go, this doesn't fit the mold. This is where I know I can jump in and make an impact and be a great owner.
Mhm.
Hopefully this conversation is giving you some courage to at least start looking at making that jump. Until next time, keep those lasers cutting and those spindles turning. Have a super day. Thanks for listening to the Job Shop Show podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe so future episodes are automatically downloaded directly to your device. You can also leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Not only do I read every single one, it also helps me understand what content matters most to you.
Thanks again for listening to the Job Shop Show.